what I usually like to do when I start speaking with business groups is I like to ask people, when I say the word etiquette, what do you think of? What comes to mind? So just kind of think in your head for a second, what comes to mind? Typical answers that I get are things like being polite and saying please and thank you and holding the door open for others, which is all great. And sometimes I get old-fashioned or antiquated or out of date. And I really love it when I hear those things, because there's no doubt that as we look around us, oftentimes in our social settings especially, that we look around and say, yeah, it really does kind of feel like etiquette has gone the way to the dodo. Think about it when you're at a movie theater per se. I was at the theater a couple weeks ago, and when I was there, a woman sat down next to me, and she reclined her seat and then brought out what appeared to be a Tupperware container of tuna fish salad that she had brought from home and crackers, and then continued to eat it almost throughout the rest of the entire movie, basically treating the movie theater like it was her living room. I know we've all had similar experiences or some type of experiences at the movie theater, I'm sure. Or even when you're on an airplane and the person next to you takes off their shoes and then begins massaging their feet. Or even in the aisles of Target, you're walking down the aisle and you're minding your own business shopping, and all of a sudden there's somebody next to you on a Bluetooth receiver, a hands-free receiver, and they're talking to their mother or their brother or sister about the latest family drama, and all of a sudden you're brought into this conversation that you didn't necessarily want to be a part of, but you were just by proximity to them. So there's all sorts of interesting social situations out there that we all encounter, but you can believe it, there's also lots of etiquette offenses at work. And that's why over the next few minutes that we have together, I want to help make sure that you have what I will call the tool of etiquette as an advantage to you in your career. It really will become a differentiator for you. This is what people look for when they're hiring and promoting within companies. And it's a unique skill set. Not everyone has it, but you're going to. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm going to share my screen right now and pull up my program. And I do want to encourage you, I know you all have yourself on mute right now, or most of you do, but if you have questions anytime along the way, I really appreciate and encourage you to go ahead and pipe up during that moment, because oftentimes we forget the questions that we have. Or I also love the discussion that often comes out of these business sessions, because I learn things along the way as well. And you all certainly have had unique experiences, no doubt, and that you've been confronted with. So I'd love to hear about them and love for you guys to kind of converse with me about it a little bit. So little pop quiz here. Let's start with this. And if you can shout out or maybe just try and unmute for a second. So what side of your shirt should your name tag be placed? Anybody have an idea? You can even just point to it. I'll show you. Right-hand side. Your name tag. When you're at that next meeting or convention or group gathering, your name tag always goes on the right-hand side of your shirt. And the reason behind that is that when you go to shake hands, that is the line of sight. So you are looking directly up and you're able to sort of see that person's name right as you're shaking that hand. So right-hand side, you'll notice too, the next time you're out, if you weren't already doing it properly, you'll notice how many people look down and are kind of unsure which side it goes on. You'll notice a lot of people do it on the left-hand side. You'll always be in good standing on that right-hand side. The left-hand side is reserved for lapel pins, for boutonnieres, gentlemen, and corsages, ladies. Okay. Another one, I teach a lot of business etiquette dining. I think understanding how to conduct yourself at a dinner table or a lunch table is a critical skill as it relates to business. There are a lot of companies that do hiring over a lunch or a dinner because they want to see those types of interactions that you're having at a dinner table. Can you have that conversation and do it well while not talking with your mouth full? Are you polite to the waiter or the waitress who's serving you? I have had a CEO tell me that he was hiring for one of his higher up C-level executives, and they were down to 2 final candidates. Took them both to dinner, and they were certain they were going to hire this one specific person. And after the dinner meeting that they had, the candidate was so rude to the wait staff that they nixed him immediately. So this stuff matters. There's all sorts of stories. I've heard many, so it's important. But this is just general protocol. Does anybody have any idea which side of your plate your knife goes on?
Right.
Right? Did I hear right? That's exactly right. Right. So when you're looking down at your dinner table, let's say you're at that meeting, at that conference, and you're confronted with that situation where you have too much silverware in front of you and you've got water glasses and butter plates. You're not sure which is which. Just remember with your utensils, you're always going to work out to in. The only thing that's going to be on the left side of your plate are your forks, and your knife and your spoon will always be on the right hand side. And then have you all heard the B and the D? The trick. So as you sit down at your place setting, you hold up that B in your right hand. You all can, everybody put those B's and D's up for me really quick. Can I see it? That D is drink on your right hand side. That B is for bread plate or appetizer plate on your left hand side. That'll never fail you. So in case you sit down and somebody accidentally spills your water, that's fine that they did it, but you won't be the one to do it. This is an interesting, sorry, did I interrupt? Okay, this is an interesting one. Do you introduce the client to your boss or your boss to the client? The rule of thumb here is that you always introduce to the person of honor. So at this, it may seem like your boss would be the higher up in the person, but really the person of honor here in this situation is your client. So you're going to introduce your boss. Mr. CEO, I would really like for you to meet Mrs. Smith, our client. That's how you do it. That's how you distinguish that honor. Lastly, is it okay to talk on the phone, on the elevator? Raise your hands if you think yes.
No.
None of you raised your hands, except for you've probably done it here and there, right? We all have. It's one of those things that that happens here and there. But the best rule of thumb always is, just like within those Target aisles or anywhere else you else are, don't bring other people unnecessarily into the conversations that you're having. Go ahead and finish up that phone call and that conversation before you continue it in a public space. Okay, but first, let's talk a little bit about the idea of etiquette and that word, okay? I'm going to teach you about the 3 principles of etiquette that are going to serve you in everything that you do. Etiquette is really the why, and the manners are the how. They're the specific instructions. Etiquette is a much bigger idea. Etiquette is about 3 principles, and here's what they are. Consideration, thinking before you act. How's that going to affect others? Respect, making choices that build relationships, and honesty. Being authentic, being truthful, doing it sincerely, right? So the idea behind the principles of etiquette are, if you're ever in a situation and you don't know what manner to use, and that's going to happen to you, you think, is what I'm doing considerate? Is it respectful to the others around me? And is it honest? And if you can answer yes to those, then you're going to be in perfect standing. Here's a great example of how manners and principles are different. A manner changes over time. Okay, so think, back in this big old book of etiquette right here, there are chapters devoted to how women cannot go out without a chaperone. Clearly, that was the manner back in 1922 and is not today. They're time sensitive. These things change. Manners also vary between cultures. This example right here of shaking hands versus bowing. Going to dinner in China, trying to use chopsticks instead of asking for a fork and knife, or even eating with your hands versus utensils. It's important to understand these cultural differences within the situations that you are. That's where the principles serve you. You think to yourself, what should I do in this situation? How can I best honor my host or client or whatever business situation that you're in? That's the difference. Anybody have any questions about that? All right. So moving on, this is where it gets really gray. We have so many modern day considerations, though, when it comes to etiquette that seem kind of hard to navigate. Gentlemen, do you stand up when a woman sits down at the table? How many of you do that? So let's say a social situation. How many of you stand up when a woman walks in at the table, especially like a dinner party? Okay. What about, do you open doors for women? And women, do you sometimes open doors for men? And you let them open doors for you? What about, this is even more hazy in a business situation, right? There's so much more gender neutrality right now. And the rule of thumb here, and I've taught this to several MBA and executive MBA and firms, and I think it's really interesting to hear the discussion on this, because I get a lot from, especially maybe some of the older generation males, that absolutely I still do these things within a business situation. Being in a business situation does not change the fact that I'm still going to be considerate as possible to open that door, whether it's for a lady or a man. You know, I was taught to stand up when a woman sat down at the table, and that's what I do. So it's interesting to hear that, and I think that that's an appropriate thing to do, but the consideration part of it comes into, if you hold that door open and the lady then says, that's okay, I've got it, no need to, then that's when you need to shift gears and remember that for next time. They would prefer you not to open the door, so don't do it. So it's okay. My point of this whole slide here is it's okay to default to some of those, you know, what we might call a little bit of an old school or type of consideration, type of etiquette. Just remember to make sure that you are doing what the person prefers that you're in the company of. Okay, so how do we make a lasting impression? Etiquette and great business protocol is all about making a lasting impression, and the very best way that you can do that is through that opening and initial handshake. This is your chance to really display who you are and the kind of person you are. And I know that sounds so over the top when it comes to just a handshake, but I can't tell you how many stories I have heard from hiring partners of firms who say, you know, I can know from that first 5 seconds, that handshake and that initial eye contact, whether or not this person is going to fit within this corporation and this culture. So how do you do a proper handshake, right? You extend that right hand, thumb up, palm flat. You grasp firmly. You guys all know this. No bone crunching, none of the limp fish, none of that, right? But the other thing that comes up a lot is the incessant shake. You guys all encountered that where like you're talking and you're introducing yourself. Oh, it's so nice to meet you. Yes, wonderful day. How are we doing? And you're thinking, is this person ever going to stop shaking my hand? It's completely acceptable in a situation like that to go ahead and kind of pull yours back. All you really need there for that perfect handshake is, you know, 2 to 3 pumps, and then you can pull it back and put your hand down. That smile and that eye contact are critical. Hello, Mr. Smith. It's so nice to meet you. Yes, my name is Mrs. Adler. That's critical to do that. It's also critical to use proper titles. Don't assume that you can use their first name upon first pass. Always use a last name and then the appropriate title, if it's Dr. or Mr. or Mrs. or whatever it happens to be. The other ones that I come across as well, as far as handshake questions, people often ask me, what about, you know, the hand pepper? Is that okay? You know, I really mean it. You know, oftentimes I put my hand on top of the other person because, you know, I like them. I'm trying to show them, oh, you know, we're maybe a little more familiar. And the business answer to this is, do not put your hand on top of somebody else's. This actually implies that you have a bit of a dominance. We see that sometimes in the media, that when people give the handshake and then they grip the other elbow, right? It's almost like a dominance, almost like a one-up type situation. So the best way to handle that handshake is just that straight-up handshake. Make sense? Any questions? Anybody had any weird situations out there? All right. I'm sure you have. All right, introductions go right along with it, right? So you've made that crucial handshake, you've done all of that right. Now you're in a room and let's say you need to introduce somebody to another business colleague, right? The most important thing here is that you follow all that great protocol that we just learned about handshakes, but please make sure that you always stand up. I can't believe how many times I see people, whether you are in a meeting and they walk across the room and you remain seated, shaking hands, or maybe you're at a meeting at a luncheon and someone walks over and people stay seated. The most respectful thing you can do to the person you're meeting is stand up, look them directly in the eye so you have that equal playing field when you're doing that handshake and when you're doing that introduction. Look the person in the eye, you know this. Introduce the younger person to the older person. This goes right hand in hand with what I was saying earlier about how you introduce to the person of honor. So we still, unless there is a business hierarchy that has already been established that you know of, you're going to want to introduce the younger person to the older person, and this goes for a social situation as well. Pronounce names clearly and articulately. Make sure you know how to pronounce the person's name before you ever get up in front of an audience. If it's somebody you're introducing to your boss, make sure that you have that clear understanding what that person's name is. If you're going to get on a phone call or a conference call, make sure you know those names. How many of you have, any of you listened to the NPR podcast, How I Built This? Have any of you heard of that? It's great. If you haven't heard of it, it is one of those wonderful things to listen to on any work commutes or working out. NPR started this, and basically what they do is they interview heads of company who have made it, who have built this, right? So it's everything from Chipotle to Amazon to Zappos to Airbnb and beyond, all sorts of Starbucks, all sorts of businesses. So I was listening to one the other day, and it's fascinating because, of course, all these people, started off on their couch, living in a friend's couch. They had nothing, most of them, and built these multi-million and billion-dollar businesses. So it's kind of fascinating to listen. But I was listening to one the other day, and it was from the owner of a company called Spanx, and she, at age 27, started this company, which is now worth close to $1 billion, all from an idea that she had. And she was telling the story about how she didn't have enough money in order to write the patent for Spanx. So she went ahead and, got basically how to write patent for dummies and went through it and got it down. And she had a friend who was an attorney, and she said, "Can you just please look this over for me before I submit it to the U.S. Patent Office?" And he said, "Sure." And he said, "One thing I need to know is what these are made of." She said, "Oh, okay, hold on one second. I'll call my production group." She had like a production facility in North Carolina who was making these first prototypes of it. And she said, "The gentleman who I worked with there, who kind of was the one developing it, his name was Ken, and he worked in the back of the warehouse, and he had this real thick, wonderful Southern accent." And she called him and she said, "Ken, I just need to know what the Spanx are made of." And he said, "Oh, darling, that's easy. They're made of 70% rayon and 30% lacquer." She said, "Okay, great, I got it." So she went back to her attorney and she said, "It's 70% rayon and 30% lacquer." And he said, "Okay." And she went to sleep that night and she thought, "Why is there lacquer in pantyhose? This can't be right. I mean, isn't that flammable? There's got to be an issue here. Something's wrong here." So she calls Ken back the next morning and said, "Can you spell lacquer for me?" And he said, "Sure, lacquer, Lycra, lacquer." He was saying lycra. She had heard it another way. So it was wonderful and smart for her to go back again, and no nod to any sort of regional dialects. This was so important for her to make sure she understood and that they understood each other. And that's how easy sometimes some things can get a little miscommunicated. So make sure you're clear and that you articulate. And then, of course, like I mentioned, use titles and last names. Oh, and the conversation starter.
Before you go on, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Give me an example of when you're in a tight position because you should know somebody's last name, but it goes right out of your mind, and you need to introduce them to somebody else. How can you punt and not embarrass yourself by, "Well, I don't remember what your name is"? How do you handle that sort of situation?
Absolutely. I get this question a lot, and we've all been there. And there's really two ways that you can potentially handle it. One is you start the introduction, even if it's not the formal way that I've just discussed. You start the introduction with the person that you know. "Oh, Mr., your boss that you know, Mr. Smith, have you met my friend?" And you kind of leave it right there hanging a little bit. And typically, at that point, the person would step in and say, "I'm, Mrs. Sadler. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Smith." So you kind of obviously lean on the other person first. "Can I introduce you, please? This is my boss, Mr. Smith." And then they take it away from there. If that doesn't work, or if you feel like you can't get away with that, the only other possible one is to apologize and to be sincere about it and say, "I am so sorry. Your last name has just gone out of my head. Could you remind me one more time?" "Oh, yes, wonderful. Thank you." You move on. Because unfortunately, the apology, though, people usually will accept very well, especially if you only met, a time or two. But I personally always try and, if I've forgotten or I just don't know, I always try and do the introduction from the other way first with the person I actually know, because typically people will step in with their names pretty quickly. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Certainly. Okay, and so just talking very quickly about a conversation starter, this goes right kind of hand in hand with what you were just saying too. Whenever you introduce someone to another person, it's also really important that you start a conversation that brings a common ground to these people. Have you ever been introduced to someone else and they just give you your name and then they kind of step out and that's it, and you're left to try and start a conversation on the weather or whatever else you can come up with and grasp straws at? The best types of introductions are when you, as the introducer, say something to the effect of, Mr. Smith, this is Mrs. Kellogg. I know you're an avid runner. She actually just finished a 5K. You two might, really enjoy talking about where you've done your runs. You start them off on something that you know might connect them, and then you get them going. That's the nicest way to get people going. I really appreciate it personally when people bring me into a conversation and they give me a little bit of a conversation starter so you're not going in cold. Okay, so you've got that handshake down and you've done the introductions, and maybe oftentimes a lot of these things take place in a job interview situation. That's why it's so critical to know the art of the thank you as well. I would encourage you, if you don't own any stationery at home, and I don't mean anything fancy, you don't have to have some nice piece of scroll with your monogram on it, just talking about something that you can write, a physical stationery piece of thank you note. It would be really nice to have that at your ready, because people are always impressed when they receive a personal handwritten note. It's not nearly as common today. It makes an impression, and it shows that you took time outside of just a simple email or text in order to really put thought down into it. I know I imagine you like to receive thank you notes by mail too. So just think about that, especially as you look forward in the business world, as you're interviewing, and as you're meeting new people. Take the time to say, I really enjoyed meeting you. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me about X, Y, and Z. So there's three times you really want to thank someone. You want to thank them when you walk in. Maybe you're a guest at a dinner or, again, a job interview. You want to thank them again when you leave, and you want to thank them when you write that follow-up note. So that's the rule of 3 with thank you. Always try and remember that's how many times you're going to do a thank you. I always get, okay, but can I still send a thank you email or text? Here's the answer. Yes, but you can send a thank you email if, let's say, you are interviewing for a job and you think that a potential employer is going to be making a decision in the next 24 hours. And you really want to make sure that you're right there at the top of their radar. So you would want to go ahead and send a very quick follow-up email, how much you enjoyed meeting them today and appreciated the interview. But still follow up with that thank you note as well. It's really the only time you really want to use text or email is in a case where it's a real time sensitive issue. Otherwise, just defer to the thank you note, but do it anyway. Text, I would say, really try and refrain from, unless it's, really, unless that person only likes to respond by text. And there's some people like that. All right, 4 tips for conversation too. I think this is important because so often today, number one, everybody's walking around with a cell phone right there in their hands. And you feel almost instantly in most conversations that their full attention might not be on you. So you can distinguish yourself by making sure that your phone's put away and that you're actually listening to the person that you're talking to. Show interest, ask questions, make comments. Really listen carefully to what they're telling you. And look at them when they're speaking. How many times have you been in a situation where you've been having a conversation with somebody else and it feels like they're kind of looking around your shoulder, maybe looking for the next person to talk to, or the next interesting thing to come along. Maybe that's not what they're doing, but that's the message you're getting by the fact that they aren't staying fully engaged with you. So you should, as a person, should be mindful of that when you're talking with someone else, that you're giving them your full eye contact and attention. On that note, pay attention. I'm guilty of this. I will sometimes be thinking as they're talking to me about maybe the next thing that I am intending to say to them, or that I'm wanting to say, or that I'm wanting to get across. So really try and be mindful not to spend your time thinking about what you're going to say next, or you might not hear really what's being said. And then last but not least, be mindful not to be that story one-upper. There's always the person who is, full of humor and has those great stories, and you want to hear them and you want them to interject, but it feels kind of bad when you're the person trying to finish saying what you're saying, and all of a sudden they're saying, oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean last week, and then they dive into their story, and you didn't finish yours. And so it just feels kind of like they weren't really hearing you and being considerate of what you have to say. And vice versa, just make sure you're not that person who's, jumping into their story. I have a lot of people who often say to me, I'm terrible at making conversation. It's difficult for me. I'm nervous. I'm introverted. Insert an array of issues that people have when it comes to conversation. It's a large conference and I hardly know anybody, and it feels awkward just to walk up and insert myself into a conversation. And so I always tell everybody, there's always one really great default that you can fall back on. You can always fall back to everyone's favorite topic. And no, it's not what everyone's binging on Netflix. Does anybody have an idea of what everyone's favorite topic is?
So,
you say what? Say it again.
Everyone's favorite topic is themselves.
You got it. Everyone. Well done. Everyone's favorite. And I say this with a little bit of humor too, because I do want to make sure that I'm not saying that we are all these massive narcissists. But what I'm saying is that it's very easy to make conversation if you start asking people about themselves. Everybody knows something about themselves clearly. So if you're ever at a lack for how to start a conversation with someone, just start asking a bunch of questions. Tell me, oh, that's interesting. What'd you do over the weekend? How was that? Oh, okay, you have grandkids? Okay, how old are they? What do they do? Not only is this a great way to develop and build a relationship, you also start to file away some nuggets, especially in business situations, that you can use for later. The next time you see that person, you remembered that they told you that their grandchild was about to turn 6, and you can say, how was that birthday party? How'd that go? These are great ways to really root yourself into a business situation and endear yourself. Again, in an authentic way. Just a quick tip on, at conferences or meetings, because this is when you would often use some of these things. Really pay attention to the dress code. Is it business casual? Do you need that jacket on? Ladies, is this cocktail attire? Is this business attire? What does that look like? Make sure you know. We already talked about that. Name tags on the right. Appetizers. You would not believe the amount of questions I get asked about appetizers. And I get it, because here's what happens. You're standing at a conference or a meeting or wherever, and a get together, and you've got a drink in one hand and a full appetizer plate in the other, and somebody wants to shake your hand. And you're thinking, what do I do with this? I've got all this stuff in front of me. The rule of thumb there is, do your best never to have a drink and a plate in your hand at the same time. You're always going to want to make sure that you have a side table or something where you can set that plate down, and maybe you're just holding your drink, or vice versa. On that same note, a little tip, keep your drink in your left hand, because it always keeps that right hand free to shake hands. So anytime I'm out and about, I always, if I have a glass of wine or whatever it is with me, I always have that in my left hand to keep that hand free. Makes it a little bit easier and a little less awkward. And don't overload that appetizer plate. It just, it looks a little less conscientious. Put your phone away. It's not a crutch. Just go ahead. It's okay to look around and look for your next conversation opportunity. Or better yet, you're available then for a conversation to come to you if you're not on your phone. Make those introductions and then set your drink down. And really this serves two purposes. One is it frees you up to have a more of a conversation and shake hands too if it was in your other hand. And two is it keeps you from drinking too much, especially in a business situation. It'll keep you a little more on point. All right, your personal brand. I think your personal brand is really important. What you think of yourself might be very different than potentially what other people think of you. And I think that's sometimes hard for all of us to hear, because we think we have ourselves pegged on how we conduct ourselves and what we look like, what our appearance, our actions, and our words are. But if somebody gives you any sort of constructive feedback or criticism on any of these areas, it's to your best interest to take it very much to heart, because even if you don't see it that way, they and others might. So it's important to make sure that you are really looking at it from that 360-degree picture. At the Emily Post Institute, we love to do an exercise where you think of 3 words that describe yourself. You can think of those right now if you want. And then you write them down, and you don't have to do that right now, but then you can go and ask 3 other people that you know, who know you well. Maybe it's a family member and a friend and a colleague, or whatever it happens to be, a fellow student. And you ask them to give you 3 words that describe you. And I think you'll be interested to see how different, potentially, the words are that you describe yourself from how other people describe you. And usually it's wonderful, positive things that maybe you didn't even consider about yourself. So that's one of the first ways to start to build your image and think about what your personal image looks like. Another really important way to do it is to make sure that your appearance is up to shape and tip top. The biggest point here, and I'm going to run through a list of just real quick workplace do's and don'ts, but the biggest issue here is don't let your attire detract from your talents. You know, if you are expressing yourself at a job, or, you know, in whatever community is, or internship, or whatever it happens to be, or at that job interview, or if it's perceived that your appearance is detracting from that culture, that corporate culture, or that workplace, then it's going to be a check against you, and you just don't want that. So a couple things to look out for. Flip-flops. I know that seems self-evident, but a lot of people report to me that they have people who wear flip-flops in the workplace. Not only that, I've had people report to me that not only do people wear flip-flops, but they trim their toenails at their desks in their workplace. So it's unbelievable sometimes what people don't think about before they do it, what they don't consider. Tennis shoes. Tennis shoes are a little tricky here. If you are new to a job or new to a culture, always default away from a tennis shoe. You know, if this is something that you are then starting to realize that, you know, that's okay at the corporate culture here in this particular workplace, tennis shoes are fine, that's great. Just make sure that you understand, or just on Fridays, you're always going to want to default to that higher level. Beware of the latest trends. You know, if you decided over the weekend that you wanted to try, you know, dyeing a strand of your hair purple, just be wary about that, you know, for that next Monday or job interview or whatever it is you're going to, right? Might not fit in so well there. Hats and hoodies. There's rarely a time when a hat or a hoodie is appropriate in the workplace environment. Gum. Gum is and can be very distracting. My word of advice, especially to the executives that I teach, is go for a mint over gum in all situations. Because even though you think that you might be chewing your gum quietly and discreetly, oftentimes the person next to you might hear it or think otherwise. I imagine we've all been in those situations. Maybe it's with a significant other, whatever, where you've said, I can hear you chewing your gum. And they're like, really? You know, you have no clue. Same thing goes for me. You just have no clue. Obviously, beware of too revealing, too flashy. Be careful with cologne and perfume. And then just a real quick word on tattoos. This obviously is a pretty divisive topic and can be. And I like to approach it from 2 different angles. When I'm talking to maybe my older generation corporate executives who may have some negative feelings or attitude toward a tattoo, I try and remind them that people get tattoos and people have tattoos for a variety of reasons. Some are in remembrance of an achievement, some are in remembrance of family members, or there's so many different situations that would be necessary on your part never to judge or to think too quickly about why someone might have a tattoo. Conversely, if you are the person with the tattoo, it's important to understand that your job is to, again, make sure that your attire is not detracting from your talents within that environment. And so if it calls for you to make sure that that particular tattoo is covered up in that environment, that's really what you want to default to and ensure that you're doing. Because again, this is all about how you are being perceived, because that's really what helps you get promoted and advanced within a company. Anybody have any questions about any of that? Okay. I also want to be sure that you understand that your greatest asset is the fact that you are you at home and at work. And congruency really equals trust in the business world. So people want to make sure that what they're getting at work is the same kind of person that is outside in their personal life too. And when I say that, I mean, Google yourself. If you haven't Googled yourself, make sure you know what's out there, because I guarantee you that future employer or current employer is Googling you. Nothing is private. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Make sure that what you get out there is something that you would want a potential future employer to see about you. And if it's not, there are obviously ways you can take that stuff down. But the biggest rule of thumb that we love to teach is the bulletin board rule. And I think this will serve you well if you always consider it before you do anything. If you can't put it on a bulletin board for anyone to read, don't email it, text it, IM it, leave it on a voicemail, tweet it, or blog it. And we say this because, again, nothing is truly private. Just like when Snapchat came around and, everybody realized that you could take a photo of the screenshot. I mean, you could take a screenshot of anything these days. Just because you have a private Instagram account or a private Facebook account doesn't mean that somebody else who has access to it couldn't take a quick picture or whatever it is and broadcast it out to a much larger community. Nothing is really, truly private. I once worked for a company and we had an intern who I really appreciated, and she was fantastic. And we were in the process of hiring new interns. And I was sort of going between a few candidates. And this intern came to me and said, I really feel like this candidate B would not fit well within this specific corporate culture and in order to advance the ideals of etiquette. And I say this because of what is on her Twitter feed. Well, I did not have access to this woman's Twitter feed and wasn't looking at it anyway. But she shared it with me, and I didn't view it, but she was sharing with me just some ideas about it. And I mean, the thing is, again, you have no idea how far-reaching some of your information can be. So it's important to really think about that. Make sure that your personal you is well represented as your public you and your business you. I'm going to skip right through this really quick and go straight to, this is a great example of being careful. So there was Ketchum PR is a huge public relations firm. And this is a true story, one of their account executives, his name was James Andrews, he was going to visit one of their largest clients, FedEx, in Memphis. And as he was landing literally on the tarmac, he tweeted, "True confession, but I'm in one of those towns where I'd scratch my head and say I'd rather die than live here." And the client, his co-part at FedEx, saw this, quickly elevated it up the chain at FedEx. And one of the bosses over at FedEx called the boss over at Ketchum PR and said, "This guy's gone. He's out of here. We will not be, misrepresented like this." He was fired the next day. In his mind, I'm sure he thought it was harmless and who's looking at it and I'm just being funny. But, in the end, it cost him his job. Okay. Any questions about any of that? All right, real quick tips on phone etiquette. Let's see how far we are. They are everywhere, aren't they? Answer your phone with, and this is just a quick tip on how to best represent yourself, again, personal life and professional life. When you're answering your phone, and I do this, again, on my personal cell phone, I always just answer it, "Hi, this is Courtney." And I do that because that way it helps, number one, for the person on the other end of the line not to have to say, "Hi, is this Courtney?" So then they know instantly, they've connected with the right person, they got me, and it helps me then when I call some other people too, whenever they say that back. So it's a nice practice to get into because, again, as you enter the business world, you're gonna wanna answer it that way no matter where you are. Be careful that you choose your tablet, iPhone, and laptop covers with an eye to business. And by this, I mean, be wary of, putting a case on that phone that might have, a vulgar word or, anything like that. Just be careful about what you're representing when you've got those open in front of people. Be careful of the message your cell phone conveys. And I say this because how often, and every time I do this, by the way, in front of any of my audiences, most of the audience has their cell phone sitting on the table right next to them, right? And so I start to say, be careful about the message you're selling. And all of a sudden I see people very slowly slipping that cell phone back down into their pocket or their purse or whatever. And I say this because what that conveys to people is that if that device goes off, whether you're speaking in front of me or not, I'm probably going to pay attention to it. And if we're having lunch and we're talking, but my cell phone right here goes off, I'm going to check it really quick. That's why it's there, right? So that you can check it very quickly. So whereas there may be instances where it's important for you to do that, the general default here, and again, especially in a business room, I have been in business meetings where I have seen executives absolutely rip up people in the room for having cell phones out on the table in front of them while he was trying to give some direction. You don't want to be that person. Just make sure that that phone is put away and that you're giving your attention. It's not like if you needed to check it, you couldn't, take a quick 5 seconds somewhere therein to pull it out of your bag or whatever it happens to be. But the best form of respect you can give somebody really is to put that phone away and out of sight. Speakerphone only behind closed doors. Too many people use speakerphones out in the open. Don't talk on hands-free in public spaces. Nobody wants to be in your conversation. And please don't take the conversation into the restroom. This happens. You all know it happens. It happens all the time. All right. Real quick, what do? Okay, you're at a job interview for an internship you really want, and a cell phone begins ringing. After the second ring, you and the hiring boss realize it is your phone. You forgot to put it on silence, clearly. You would try desperately to ignore it. Say you are so very sorry. Quickly answer it and tell the person on the other end you'll call them back. Excuse yourself momentarily, leave the room and answer it. Or apologize and shut the phone off without answering the call. Anybody want to take a shot at that?
Number 4.
Number 4. Anybody else differ? Yep, you're right. Number 4. What I like about this is I think everybody kind of has, might be able to rationalize all of these answers in a certain way. I mean, some people might just desperately try and ignore it, right? But sometimes that feels even worse because it's so clear and obvious, and that person, the interviewer might just be waiting for you to acknowledge it and say, I'm so sorry. And number 4 even has its own flaws too, because some people might just say, even the apology is disruptive. So just quickly shut it off and put it away. No need to say anything. I think you could probably go either way based on the situation, but obviously the overarching answer here is this. Do the least disruptive thing that you possibly can, and that is truly that you just want to shut it off as quick as possible and continue moving on with this meeting that you're having. You would never want to answer it. You would never want to quickly do that and say, oh, I'm so sorry, yes, okay, I'll call you back. You would want to just say you're sorry or just quickly shut it off and get past the situation. Real quick, I'm not going to dote on these, but these are some great tips for smartphone use. Again, this really just goes back to not being controlled by your smartphone, knowing how to appropriately use it in the right situations, because it really does say something about you if you're able to put it away and use those interpersonal skills to navigate yourself. Email etiquette. This comes up a lot, especially in office environments. Too many people have a story about how they accidentally, pressed reply all, and they meant to press just reply to someone, and it, spread all over the company. So here's 5 quick tips to prevent that email heartburn. Number 1, this is really what we call the 24/7 rule. If you're upset, you've got an email. Someone sent you an email. Maybe it's your professor even sent you an email, and you are just livid over this. You feel it's unfair or whatever the situation might happen to be, okay? And you're right there. You're typing that response. You're ready to just fire back. Maybe it's a colleague, whatever it happens to be. The best rule of thumb here is sleep on it. Give it that 24 hours or at least that overnight before you respond if you possibly can, because 9 times out of 10, that email will look completely different in the morning. It will be much more rational and probably much more well organized. And sometimes that email won't even go out at all. You might just decide that it's not worth it, or that the situation needs to be handled in maybe a different way, right? Texting rules need not apply. When you're writing an email, just get used to this from now on, whether it's your social, communications straight into business, but the emojis don't belong in a workplace, a business email, the LOLs and whatnot. So just be mindful of that the way that you text is not the same way that you need to email. Read it again. Make sure you don't have any typos. I once had a candidate send me a job resume, and I was, at the time I was working in public relations, and she said she was seeking a job in public relations. And bless her heart, of course I didn't hold it against her, but, had she just read it one more time, it wouldn't have been such an embarrassing typo. So how's your tone of voice? This is a trick, because you cannot tell tone of voice by email. You cannot tell sarcasm. You cannot tell, happiness necessarily or sadness. So, just be really careful that you aren't trying to maybe be sarcastic in an email and it's not coming across. And number 5 is my most important rule. Pick up the phone. If you are ever in a scenario in an email where you are just absolutely unsure how to respond, maybe something has upset you, like number 1, or maybe it just seems more complicated. Instead of trying to handle this over email, pick up the phone and actually have a verbal conversation. You would be surprised how much can be remedied when you start to realize, oh, maybe that other person didn't really mean it like that at all. Or, maybe it seemed short in nature, annoyed in nature, but really it was just the person didn't have enough time or much time in order to respond to you. So it came across that way. You just pick up that phone and be brave enough to pick up that phone and have that conversation. Or even if you're in an office, walk down that hall and knock on that person's door and talk to them. So much can be alleviated and remedied by an actual verbal conversation. So here's our goal. We're all trying to get to be what we call the 24/7 professional. This is, again, that same idea of you are the same professional at home as you are at work. You are trustworthy. You are authentic. You are bringing this professionalism, this etiquette level to every ounce and area of your life. You don't turn it on and turn it off just based on where you are. But that is what a true etiquette professional does. They understand that they are the same person no matter what. And any employer will appreciate you if that's the kind of person that you are. So just remember that, your actions outside of work or school, they're going to affect you. Just because, you are offsite having, this works especially at work. Just because you're offsite having drinks with colleagues after work doesn't mean that that information doesn't come back to work the next day. It absolutely does. Purely social situations can become business situations instantly. So there's oftentimes those opportunities come to you when you weren't realizing it or weren't thinking they were going to be right there. So you've met somebody through a friend and all of a sudden you realize this person is influential at a company you really want to get your foot in the door of. All of a sudden you're switched. You need to be able to make sure that, maybe you're at a party that you haven't had too many drinks at that moment, and you can still have that professional level conversation with them. Just remember, what kind of person that you want, that you're working to become here. Highest professional level, you guys know that. And then using those principles, consideration, respect, and honesty, no matter what others think. I'm just going to put these up here very quickly, the top 10 business etiquette behaviors. I can't harp on enough. Be on time, be on time, be on time. That is such a strike against people. If the most precious gift anybody can give is the gift of their time. So don't waste it. Make sure that you're a little bit early. If it's a job interview or a meeting, be 5 to 10 minutes early, not more than that, because more than that, the person then has to deal with you and you're too early. But 5 to 10 minutes early is an appropriate time. Then you might just wait, to be introduced until closer to your time. Okay, so I've used my time. Does anybody have any questions that arise or even any situations maybe that have come up? No one's had any etiquette conundrums. That's okay. Well, if anything comes up, if you're ever confronted with situations, I would love to help. My email's right here. Don't hesitate. Email me, let me know. I always give out my email at the end of all my presentations, and people are frequently emailing me with things that have come up, in the weeks after that they just weren't quite sure how to handle. Feel free to.
Courtney?
Yes.
This is Bill Henry at Wichita State. I wanted to ask your view of something that I think is a pet peeve. Is a pet peeve for me, and that is I listen to public radio, so I listen to a lot of people that are having an interview where they're thanked for joining in. And their response is, "Oh, well, thank you," rather than "you are welcome." Do you have any strong feelings? It seems as if "you are welcome" is no longer used anymore.
Right, right. You know, I do see this a lot. I personally have had the opportunity to be frequently interviewed on morning television too, and I agree with you. The majority of what I see is a thank you, and then somebody else saying back to them, "Oh, thank you for having me," or "I appreciate the opportunity to be on here." I would say that primarily, I think a nice "you're welcome" is excellent, but I think what people want to convey very quickly in those situations is, well, I appreciate the opportunity to be on here, so thank you. I think it's perfectly acceptable and all right to go ahead and say thank you back. But I hear you, and I hear your point about how it seems a little awkward to say, well, thank you for coming. Well, thank you for having me. And it's a lot of thank yous.
It's a minor pet peeve.
Sure. I get it, though. I get it. You know, it would feel a little stale, though, if somebody said, you know, thank you for coming on, and the person, you know, back in response just said, you're welcome. It almost feels a little bit self-serving, you know, like, well, certainly, you know, I am your gift. So it's kind of nice to be able to have a way to reciprocate and say, you know, maybe you're welcome, and I appreciate being on here, or I appreciate you having me. Might be a better way to handle it. I love you bringing this up because now I personally will also be more mindful about this. It's great. Any other pet peeves from anybody else?
All right, if nobody has any more questions, then let's all thank Courtney for her time. And remember to visit our website and our social media and tell your friends about this, and they can watch it on our website if they missed the session. So Courtney, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. This was a great presentation. It's very helpful and very useful for our students.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.